Welcome to StartupHakk. My name is Spencer Thomason. I am the CEO and co-founder of CleanRouter as well as many other products. Here are some lessons that I've learned building a successful business while challenging startup norms. My challenge is to push you to rethink startup success. This is episode 3, How to Fund Your Startup. Things the venture capitalists don't want you to know. So I'm going to be dual recording this. I'm going to shoot it in video for YouTube, but also use the audio as a podcast as well. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. If you're listening to the podcast, then make sure to go and subscribe and leave a good review. And make sure you go and check out the previous episodes as well. Since this is a story, then it'll make a lot more sense if you know the backstories. So this is episode 3, How to Fund Your Startup. Things the venture capitalists don't want you to know. So I've been a software developer for 22 years. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Carson, and I have 5 awesome kids. I started this channel to tell the stories I have learned about how to start a successful company, knowing nothing about how to start a successful company. Clean Technology is the parent company of CleanRouter, as well as many other technologies and products. This podcast is going to focus on the launch of CleanRouter. It's going to be about how we took this idea and passion and built something great. So as I discussed in episodes 1 and 2, myself and the other co-founder, Eric, had an idea to make the first content filtering router for parents to be able to filter the internet, all of the internet as it came into your home. So this was the start of an idea that has grown into a $5 million business. Seriously, if you haven't gone to listen to episode 1 and 2, go do it now and hit those like and subscribe buttons. It really helps. Today we're going to talk about how we funded our startup. So the year was 2009. As I discussed in previous episodes, at this point, at about 6 months in, we had a working prototype that we'd hacked together. But a working prototype is a long ways from a final product. So we were working over months to take this prototype and build it into a full, stable, reproducible product. Eric and I were experienced software developers, so we were hard at work to make the software to be top notch. What hardware, what backend, what software on the router, these were some of the things we were working hard over that first 6 months once we'd settled into the partnership. But those aren't the things that we're going to talk about today. So as every business owner gets to a point, you find that you need money. It's nearly impossible to run your business without some essentials. So in our case, aside from salaries, we found that we needed the following just to get our fledgling business off the ground. I'm sure that you have listed these things as well for your business. Some of these things that we had already hit in the first 6 months while trying to get the product out of the door were hardware. We had to come up with some inventory. 2, we needed infrastructure. And at that point, we needed to buy and build servers, which was a lot more complicated and expensive than it is today. We also needed various services like CPAs, legal. Right off the bat, we already were running into a lot of these things that we needed before we could even get off the ground. And of course, the ever-present marketing. It's really tough to make money if you're not spending money on advertising. So we started looking at how to get some funding. We learned a lot about funding the business over the years. Over the next 10 years, we'd try a little bit of all of these different avenues that I'm going to talk about today. One of my good friends, Greg Scoresby of Campus Logic, says the CEO should always be fundraising. He told me that before he closed one round, he was already working on the next round of fundraising. Always. As a CEO, you're never not fundraising. So all of you CEOs out there, if you aren't cut out to always be fundraising, then you might want to rethink being CEO. Just saying. But here are some of the traditional ways to raise funds, and then we'll go into some of the non-traditional ways, and then I'll discuss what we did in our early days. So some of the traditional ways. First one everybody thinks about, get out and start pitching. You got to hit up the angel investors, angel investor groups, which are kind of a half between angel and VC and venture capitalists. So let's talk a little bit about each of these groups. So your angel is a general person who's going to be a high net worth individual who will be interested in being able to invest into small startup companies. Usually this is people that I would recommend that you try to find who are passionate about the subject that you're working with. Next, you have angel groups. These are a group of investors who get together, and most cities seem to have these angel groups that get together. And will bounce ideas off of each other and will listen. And a lot of times, once you kind of get one of these guys in the angel groups to come, a lot of others will follow. Sometimes they'll even actually do all of the valuation paperwork and a lot of the other legwork and legal work to help each other. And this can be an easy way to get multiple different investors. And then lastly, you have the good old traditional venture capitalists. This is going to be a lot harder if you're just a small idea or if you're a smaller company. If you've got a big billion-dollar idea, these are the guys you want to talk to. But you've got to be pretty convincing on that billion-dollar ideas. I've pitched to over 50 different VC groups in the Southwest, and I know that these guys, you really have to have your homework put together in order to be able to pitch to them. Next, you can look into formal loans, banks, other type of organizations. Formal loans are kind of tough to do without revenue. So if you don't have revenue, it's kind of tough to prove to a bank that you're going to produce revenue. But then the flip side is sometimes you can't get revenue unless you get the money to start with it. We found that even once we had revenue and we went to start some of these, it was often still tricky to get some of the money that we would need to scale to the size that we were thinking of. So formal loans can have a pros and cons too. One of the pros to a formal loan, though, is you're not diluting the company. You're not selling off any of the company. You still own all of it in the end. Whereas one of the cons are, you got to repay that money. And lastly, good old friends and family loans and notes. Now, the first thing I'll tell you about this, having been around the block for over 10 years in running a startup, these are actually a lot more common than people might initially think. A lot of times when we first started off, we kind of thought, man, these are going to be really frowned upon, and we thought later investors might not like it. And we also thought this isn't really a big boy way to do business. However, the reality is a lot of people I know actually kicked off their very first loans through family, either through loans or through convertible notes, which we can get into in a further way, or you can do some research around what a convertible note is. My big piece of advice here is if you're going to go with friends and family, in whatever structure it's going to be, formalize it. Get it written down, run it through a lawyer, make sure that you are really formalizing this process. Believe it or not, where it may seem flexible to you, later, if somebody wants their money back or they feel that they haven't been fairly dealt with, you're better off to have formalized this right from the beginning. So there's another section where you can start to sell and get revenue, or you can even do some pre-selling. I'm going to kind of group crowdsourcing into this. Some of the pros to that is it's a great way to get some money up front for a product, and you can also validate some of your sales pipeline and some of your sales and the product idea before you've even launched it. The downside is this can get a little tricky to fund a business, because if you've already funded your first run and then you burn through that money, by the time that product comes, you're kind of right back where you started again. So unless you're somehow able to make a large amount of margin on those pre-sales, it's not going to do you a whole ton of good. So this can be a little bit of a tricky chicken and egg problem. So, but ultimately at the end of the day, in some businesses, you're better off to just start selling. Now, if you get to one of these and none of these are really working for you and this isn't really your gig, you can get into some other non-traditional type of funding. Some of these very non-traditional funding is to take a second loan against a mortgage, against a rental property, or against your own home. Now, while some may say, hey, this is super crazy, Spencer, you don't know if we want to do this, it's actually also pretty common as well. My big advice is if you're going to do this, make sure that you even formalize yourself giving that loan into the company. By doing this, you can then formalize, even if you're going to use it to pay yourself salary. Initially, when you set up your company, you can set it up as an LLC, and then this becomes just a pass-through to you anyways. So it's not going to be double taxation as long as you're hitting into a scenario where you are structured correctly, which you probably wouldn't want to start out as a C Corp anyways. So in those cases, just make sure you formalize it. One, this looks a lot better on your documentation when you come back to it later. But two, this also helps you to then formalize that loan to the business to make sure that it can get paid back to you. You don't even have to put a repayment date, but if you're going to take that money out of a personal asset and put it into the company, just make sure that at later times that you understand, that the business understands and that it's formalized so that that money can come back to you in another way. I've heard of some scenarios where one business partner worked full-time at a day job and a second business partner ran the business. And then the day job, the guy working on the day job would come and help at nights on weekends to help launch the business. I've seen this work with either full or part-time, and that can be another way to fund a business. Again, a little non-traditional, but I've seen it work in a handful of cases. Lastly, I've also heard of scenarios where partners had to buy in order to get into the company, And if in order to gain equity right from day one, if you wanted to be a part of the company, you had to buy in. And so it wasn't just sweat equity you were buying, it was actually buy-in from the company. And this allowed the company to have some cash funds to start the business. But it also proved how much people wanted to get in. So these are some of the various ways that I've seen that are pretty non-traditional, but I've seen them work in a lot of different scenarios. Now, what did we do? We did friends and family for the win. We ended up working with some different friends and family that we structured in some very generous loans. These loans allowed us to get some of those first things that we were talking about with inventory, legal fees, and to help us get off the ground. And as I'll talk about in some of the later episodes, this allowed us to get the product, to build some of the first boards, and to get them to start shipping a product out to customers. So that's all that I have for you today as far as how to fund your business. I'll talk a little bit more about how we use these funds in our next episode and how we picked which boards we're going to build. But as a reminder, please don't forget to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and share with your friends and family. Thanks. We'll see you next time.